Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today's video is going to be more of an educational one. I noticed that when I talk to people about watches, some of them aren't too familiar with the different types. So I thought I'd make a quick video just breaking down all the different types of watches, or at least 99% of all the watches you're going to encounter every day. So right here, we're going to start off with the wristwatch. And so what defines a wristwatch, I mean, it's kind of self-explanatory. It does two things. It's going to tell the time, and it fits on your wrist. And that's what we're going to focus on here today. Now, the biggest differential that we're going to talk about right now is right here. We're going to talk about smartwatches. So smartwatches are a little bit different from your other types of watches, but they are still a wristwatch. But I think what really differentiates them is that they are dynamic. And what I mean by dynamic is that their functions can change, because really it's just a computer that's strapped to your wrist. So you can think of a computer, you can program it to do a bunch of different things. And smartwatches, they can be programmed, right? They can be updated, their functions can change, their appearance can change in terms of the watch face. The watch face can change. And of course, it can learn your behavior, your pattern, your exercise patterns. So smartwatches are dynamic. But when we talk about traditional watches are more static, right? They have a certain function. Once they're assembled in the factory or at the watchmaker, their functions don't really change. So if you have a watch that tells the time and tells you the date, it's always going to do that. It really can't do any more than what it was designed to do. So when we look at traditional watches, we're going to divide it again, and we're going to talk about quartz watches. So quartz watches, there's two main things. Quartz watches are regulated by a quartz crystal. Now, honestly, I can't really explain how it is regulated by a quartz crystal that well, but there are videos on YouTube if you're interested. But all you gotta know is that the quartz crystal is what makes quartz watches so accurate. And they usually have a battery. So the power source is a battery. Now, technically, smartwatches have a quartz crystal inside. Actually, a lot of electronics will have a quartz crystal, but quartz watches, in terms of the traditional sense, remember, they're static. So think of it like your Daniel Wellington watch. It will tell the time and it can't do anything else. So that's your traditional quartz watch. When you think of smartwatch, I would just think of something like the Apple Watch. And then in terms of a quartz watch, I would think of something like maybe, let's say, like a Daniel Wellington. Now, quartz watches can actually be divided even further. So we have a digital quartz. So digital quartz, it has like an LCD display. They can even have LED as well. So it has a digital display. And you can think of something like, for example, a Casio G-Shock, or even their Casio digital vintage watches. Those are digital quartz watches. And on the other hand, we have analog quartz, if you want to be more specific. That actually, the Daniel Wellington fits into that too. So basically it just has it has hands, like a typical watch. You can also think of something like maybe Seiko has a lot of quartz watches. Citizen has a lot of quartz watches as well. And so that kind of rounds up the quartz side of things. If we flip over to the other side, we have mechanical watches. So mechanical watches, again, we're going to do two main things. There's a lot of different parts to a mechanical watch, but two main things is that there's a mainspring. So think of it like a wind-up toy, right? You wind up a toy and then it goes, or maybe like a wind-up car. Mechanical watches are kind of similar. You wind up a mainspring, and that's where the power comes from. And then you have something called a balance wheel. So instead of a quartz crystal, you have a balance wheel that kind of regulates the watch and makes sure that not all of the power from the mainspring just immediately goes to the time. Otherwise, the hands would just go crazy. So the balance wheel will regulate it. And then again, we have two divisions. Now the division we're going to look at is automatic and hand winding. And actually the division between these two are kind of blurred, but an automatic watch, just know that there's a rotor. And I'll just draw what a rotor kind of looks like. Probably not the best picture. I'll put up a picture that's better. But basically the rotor can wind the watch, and the rotor is located on the back of the movement. So on the back of the watch. So that rotor can kind of swing around freely. And so, you know, if you're walking around using your watch, you can essentially wind it itself using your movement. So that's the kind of the automatic part of a automatic watch. Hand winding, it's winding only. Winding only by hand. And typically what this means is that you wind it using the crown. So you just literally take your hand and you wind it, kind of like a wind-up toy. Now some automatic watches can also hand wind as well. So when I'm talking about a hand winding mechanical watch, that means there's no rotor. So no rotor on the back. So it's a lot more hands-on. You have to wind it with your hand every single day. Whereas automatic watches, as long as you wear the watch somewhat frequently, then it's always wound up for you. So that's basically it. That's the main categories of watches. I will put a few special ones that you'll encounter. So there is one that is in between quartz and mechanical. There's actually two. So this is called spring drive. So spring drive is, yeah, it's kind of a mix of the two. And basically how it works is that you have a mainspring, just like a mechanical watch. So the power is delivered from winding up the mainspring, but there is quartz. So it's regulated by a quartz crystal. So that makes it as accurate as a quartz watch. And there's a few other mechanisms that are also going into play, but those are kind of the main two things. So you can wind it up like a mechanical, but it's regulated by quartz. Another one is called kinetic. So kinetic movement, it's basically like those hand winding flashlights where you kind of wind it up and then it delivers power. So this one has a rotor, but it has a battery slash capacitor depending on the model. So the rotor charges up the battery or the capacitor, but otherwise it kind of looks like a quartz watch, except for that rotor at the back, which sometimes you can't see unless the watch has a display case back. And it's, interestingly enough, the spring drive and the kinetic movement are Seiko movements. So you can see like Seiko was trying to innovate, you know, trying to borrow some elements from mechanical watchmaking, combine it with some quartz watchmaking. So that's spring drive and kinetic. Now, one last thing before I end the video, I just want to show some kind of interesting trend that you'll notice between these different types. If I show here a graph, if the y-axis is price, x-axis is type, and the type is right over here, typically the price goes like this. So typically your digital quartz watches are the cheapest watches you can buy, followed by analog quartz, followed by automatic watches, and followed by hand winding. And it's mostly because digital quartz watches, they're kind of designed to be cheap. Again, think of G-Shocks or think of those really cheap like cereal box watches. They're typically digital quartz. Analog quartz, there are some expensive ones. You can think of Grand Seiko, and Citizen has some expensive ones. But typically if you go beyond, let's say $5,000, you don't see that many quartz watches. When you go into automatic watches, then you can get to the tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars. Hand winding, even though it seems like it's inferior to automatic because you always have to hand wind it, one of the benefits of not having a rotor is that you can see the movement a lot clearer. So what I've noticed is that for really expensive watches, they'll actually be hand winding only. And I think that's because it gives the watchmaker or the company the chance to really decorate their movement, and not having the rotor really helps out. So in general, you kind of see this price trend. Of course, smartwatches they're not, you know, $10, $20 like some digital watches. So I guess the price it'd be kind of like that, like a check mark. So yeah, if you're looking for a watch, you'll probably notice this trend. So if you're looking for a really cheap watch, look for those digital quartz watches. And if you're looking for something more expensive or more fancy, probably your hand winding mechanical will be a case. Spring drive and kinetic, actually, I just realized spring drive is kind of on this end of things. So it's usually more expensive. Actually, it should be really here. There's no cheap spring drive watch. Whereas Kinetic is probably around here. It's around the same cost as analog quartz, but it's a little bit more expensive. So yeah, that's pretty much all the different types of watches you'll encounter. There's a few exceptions, there's a few special cases, but this chart that you see here, it encompasses like 99% of all watches that you can buy. So I hope that this was useful, and I hope that if you are interested in watchmaking, maybe you want to share it to a friend, you can show them this video and they'll be more knowledgeable about the different type of watches. So thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, I'll see you guys next time.